6 U.S. service members injured after a suspected Iranian drone slammed into a U.S. base in Syria. This was the 78th attack, 78, against an American base carried out by Iranian forces since Biden was sworn into office. And this time, the U.S. responded, killing at least 8 Iranian fighters and at least 2 counterstrikes. But a few hours later, undeterred, Iranian proxy forces were at it again, launching a series of new rocket attacks against the U.S. installations in the region, injuring even more U.S. service members. The situation on the ground and over the skies in Syria, it is not good, to say the least. Meanwhile, our commander-in-chief, Joe Biden, was in Ottawa, Canada today, having a grand old time with Justin and his socialist friends in Canada's parliament. Watch.
Good afternoon. Bonjour, Canada. We're going to build 5,500 electric charging stations. Guess who builds them? Union workers. In the words of the Canadian poet, Lieutenant Colonel John McCree, still call to us from Flanders Field, echoing their charge through the ages. And I quoted, to you from failing hands, we throw the torch to you to hold it high. So today, I applaud China for stepping up, I applaud Canada. You can tell what I'm thinking about China. I won't get into that yet.
Talk about failing hands and failing heads. Is it any wonder that America's enemies don't respect or fear Joe Biden? Joining us now with more, the former Director of National Intelligence, John Radcliffe. John, thanks for being here. So we can look at that clip of, we're going to beat him with charging stations, and, we don't know which one is China and which one is Canada. And we recognize that for what it is. But it's dangerous what's happening in Syria right now. Attacks, retaliations, escalations. Where could this lead, and what does it say about our presence in the region and how Iran feels?
Well, Pete, this is actually an illustrative example of when we talk about the difference between projecting weakness and projecting strength. Look, I appreciate the fact that the Biden administration responded to the Iranian attacks, at least this time, unlike Afghanistan, where the response was to accidentally kill a van full of 10 Afghan kids. This time, they hit their target, but they didn't send the response that Secretary Austin believed that they would, because as you pointed out, Pete, within hours, Iran fired off 7 more rockets and more injuries to U.S. forces. Compare the same situation 3 years ago when a U.S. contractor was killed. A proportionate response, sending the right message, was we decided to take out the head of the Iranian terror network, the Iranian Quds Force General Qasem Soleimani. And the message was clear. Today it's Soleimani. Tomorrow it's Supreme Leader Khamenei. And that message was well received. In fact, it worked so well, Pete, too well, that what the Iranians, we know, were so nervous and so jumpy that 2 days later they shot down a Ukrainian airliner, killing many of their own citizens. But we saw the number of attacks by Iranian-backed militias drop precipitously until, no coincidence, January of 2021, when they stepped back up. And of course, that's when Joe Biden got back in the White House. So that really underscores the difference between projecting strength from the White House and projecting weakness, which is what we've seen for the last 2 years. And it's not just Iran. It's been Russia last week. It's been China for 2 years. It'll probably be North Korea next. Pete, if we recap for your viewers the things that are happening now that weren't happening 2 years ago, we didn't have millions, an increase in millions crossing our southern border. We didn't have Russia and China openly declaring a new world order. We didn't have Russia invading Ukraine for a second time while Joe Biden was White House, and we didn't have Iran ramping up these kinds of attacks. This is not a coincidence. It is directly related to who is our commander-in-chief, and who is in the White House, and America is suffering across the world stage because of it, and it's very clear.
Yeah, that's a staggering list. It doesn't even include Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban. Add it all together, and it smells like
only
nothing.
An hour, Pete. I mean, I could spend most of it going.
Sadly, sadly. How much of this, by the way, you mentioned that new axis or increased axis between China and Russia, and they've both been willing to work with Iran. How much of these provocations are predicated on the fact that Iran feels like it has a shield now, or at least new allies in town willing to back them up too?
Absolutely, Pete. That's most of it. I mean, essentially, what Iran is saying is, look, you know who has our back? Our big brother, bully China, who, by the way, the same China that flew a spy balloon across your country in front of all of your citizens a couple of weeks ago. They've got our back. It's the level of disrespect to the U.S. and our allies is increasing. It's if you look at what China is doing now, threatening us with serious consequences for having a warship in the Paracel Islands
in the last 2 days,
you know, in international waters. Well, why wouldn't they threaten us with that, Pete? Because what happened last week when Russia shot down an MQ-9 Reaper that was in the international airspace over international waters? Joe Biden capitulated. We are now flying our drones farther south to, quote, avoid being too provocative. That's called backing down. The Biden administration keeps saying we're not looking for conflict with Iran. We're not looking for conflict with Russia. We're not looking for conflict with China. That's just Biden speak for saying we're not going to stand up for the United States of America and defend our people when we're attacked. And the world is taking note, both our allies and our adversaries.
By the way, I just want to get into the details real quick of the Iranian thing. How overt or covert is our mission there? There's reports that U.S. air defenses were down on the base. Now, maybe the Iranians knew that and took advantage of it. Maybe it's a smaller base. Can you give our viewers a sense of the footprint America still has in Syria?
Yeah, I don't want to speculate too much, Pete, about whether or not, I don't really believe in coincidences. Do I think that the Iranians got lucky? Do I think that the fact that our air defense system was not fully operational, did they just happen to time this attack? I don't know. I don't currently have access to the intelligence that would answer that, but I suspect that, again, this is an aspect where we're losing ground here, and where the Iranians are being more ambitious and more aggressive, and that they have likely exploited a vulnerability that they knew existed, as opposed to just getting lucky that our air defense system was not fully operational. And again, I think it's just showing that we're not on top of our game, and it doesn't have to do with our troops on the ground. I would put all of my faith and my life in their hands, but not in our commander-in-chief and the team that he has as his national security apparatus, because they're batting zero, Pete. They're 0 for the last 2 years, and we've got to survive the next 2 years until we can get strength back in the White House.
For sure. Can't have ducks in the open. I mean, ultimately, if they don't have a clear mission and they're not being supported and they're not given the latitude to do what they need to do, then what are they doing?
Climate change is not our number one national security threat. That's what they're hearing over there.
That's what China's hearing. That's what Russia's hearing. That's what everyone's hearing. Is we're going to build charging stations and shut down our own domestic production while they're doing serious things like building militaries. It's incredible.
Absolutely.
It's incredible. John Ratcliffe, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it tonight.